So this week we begin the 20th century, which when we talk about 20th century, we're talking about 1900 to present day. It's a century that sees a lot of change. When you think about it, in 1900 there were no cars, no planes, no electricity, definitely no internet. But yet in a short 68 years, we're landing people on the moon. So a lot of stuff happens in the century. And so a lot of change happens also with art, and it happens with music. So you will see many of these things occur. And when we talk about the present, even today, people are composing classical music, whether it's be in schools or it's people doing it for films or video games. So this is our intro to the 20th century. Then we talk about 20th century music. And the thing you'll find in 20th century music, it's all about experimentation. Composers don't want to do what people have done before. They don't want to just copy. They want to find new ways of doing things. So composers will experiment with new scales. They'll get away from the traditional major scales and minor scales. They'll try new kinds of things, jazz scales, modal scales. They'll experiment with these in creating melodies. They'll experiment with harmonies. Often harmonies become dissonant, which means they don't quite sound the way we're used to hearing harmonies sound. Maybe a little bit strange and bizarre. They'll experiment with polychords, polytonality, many different chords at the same time. Polytonality, the idea of playing three keys at the same time, key of C with the key of G. New meters are being experimented with. You have polyrhythms. New instruments are being introduced, including electronic instruments, traditional instruments in different ways. Impressionism is the first new music that appears in the modern era. It's something totally different from Romantic. And it's an art movement that originally starts in France that uses soft colors. It's dreamy, tranquil, hazy. So these composers decide to compose music that is like impressionistic art. Composers want to use these soft colors in the orchestra. The music does not have a lot of the romantic bombast. Debussy is the first composer to take this art music and transfer it into music. So you get impressionistic music, and his great pieces are Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, Clair de Lune, which is French for moonlight, and La Mer, which means the sea. And all these sound like impressionistic paintings, very soft, tranquil, dreamy, hazy. So you'll be reading about Debussy. You'll also be reading about Expressionism. Expressionism was a reaction against Impressionism. Artists felt that the Impressionists were thinking too much about the bright, rosy side of life, but life also included a dark side. So Expressionistic art used harsh colors and expressed fear, anxiety, and dark sides of the mind. So these are some pictures of Impressionistic art. So just as Impressionism had Debussy as its primary composer, Expressionism, which started in Germany, had its primary composer in a composer named Schoenberg. Schoenberg was an expressionist composer, and his great work, he wrote many different things, but his great work is Pierrot Lunaire. This is one of your assignments. And Pierrot is a clown, and Lunaire is moonstruck. Moonstruck means crazy. So these are a set of poems set to this new 12-tone system. It's atonal music. Music sounds very strange, very bizarre. All I can suggest is when you listen to this music, listen to it with an open mind. It's definitely on the strange side and very experimental, and quite the opposite. There's no way this can be mistaken for impressionistic music. That very soft, dreamy, tranquil stuff. This is a different kind of thing. If impressionistic is a dream, expressionistic is a nightmare. Igor Stravinsky, you'll be introduced to with The Rite of Spring, and it is the greatest modern orchestral work. In this piece, Stravinsky really breaks away from what orchestras have been doing. He experiments with all kinds of things in the music, whether it's polytonality, polyrhythms, traditional instruments played in different ways. So he really goes all out on this piece. And when this piece was first performed, it did not go over well. It was way too strange. If you listen to it now, it sounds kind of like movie music, if you will. So Stravinsky is one of your listening assignments, and you'll also be reading about it in your chapter. So The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky. If you also watch Fantasia 2000, the last piece in there is a piece by Stravinsky called The Firebird. So that's a good piece. We will talk about American composers this week. And I usually wait till the 20th century to get to our American composers, because it takes until the 20th century before American composers got really unique things to say. Before the 20th century, Americans just kind of copied what Europeans were doing. So it's the 20th century that sees composers like Scott Joplin. He was an African-American composer, and he was he composed primarily during 1899 to 1917. He's known as America's Chopin. And the way that Chopin took a lot of Polish folk music and elevated it to art, Scott Joplin took American folk music, being the American folk music called ragtime. It was a music that was invented by African-American pianists, and he elevated it to art. He also wrote the first American opera, Tremonisha, an opera with an all-black cast, a black story, and black music, African-American music. I have a video assignment that has a little bit of Scott Joplin's opera, Tremonisha. You'll read about Aaron Copland, and I would suggest, if you can, see if you can check out some of these things on YouTube. Fanfare for the Common Man, because Americans are common. Common people, we aren't royalty. Appalachian Spring, and ballets, Rodeo and Billy the Kid, which are Western-themed ballets, and they have a lot of Western-sounding music. So that is Aaron Copland. You'll read about George Gershwin. He will be in your listening and review assignments. He was a Broadway composer of the 20s and 30s, but he also wanted to branch out and work in the classical realm. So with that said, he could have just been a great Broadway composer who would have been really, really famous. But he went on to write Rhapsody in Blue, which is a great American orchestral work because it sounds American. He uses jazz rhythms, jazz scales, jazz harmonies, and color. And American in Paris, another great orchestral work. And Porgy and Bess, which was the first produced American opera. Tremonisha was not produced till long after Scott Joplin died in the 70s, but Porgy and Bess was produced in the 30s, and it is music that has very jazzy sound to it, and it's sung in English with an all-black cast. So that's George Gershwin's mark in the world of classical music, and these are just a few of the things he wrote. He wrote many classical kind of things. I would recommend, if you get a chance, listen to find some YouTube. John Cage. He was an avant-garde American composer. Avant-garde means he was very experimental, tried to do things that nobody had done before. He did things like stick a lot of weird stuff inside a piano and made a piano not sound like a piano. and he wrote a piece called 4 minutes 33 seconds. There's a version for orchestra and piano where for 4 minutes and 33 seconds nobody does anything. It's silent. And the idea is anything you hear in that silence is the music. Those you can actually find those on YouTube. They're very interesting. I recommend find the orchestra version of 4 minutes and 33 seconds. It's fascinating. You will read about John Williams, and you'll do a listening assignment on John Williams. He's mainly known for being a film composer. He's done the music for Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, etc., etc., etc. He's still around. He still composes music. He tours the world doing guest conducting. And if you get the chance, every summer, John Williams usually conducts at the Hollywood Bowl, and they do his film music. They put his little clips of the movies on stage while he conducts the various kind of things. You will learn about Leonard Bernstein. He will be our last composer. Leonard Bernstein was a great American conductor. He was a great American conductor in an era where it was mostly Europeans that were famous. As a composer, he composed the music for West Side Story, and which is an update of Romeo and Juliet, and an opera Candide. He was a concert pianist, toured the world playing with orchestras. He was a music educator. He was one of the first people to go do a national television program explaining classical music and bringing classical music to the masses and making it not so unfamiliar. And he's a music advocate. He was always at the forefront trying to get music for funding for the arts. So that is our week. Hopefully you enjoy it. You'll see here a lot of interesting music. And all these people are in your review activities and your listening assignments. Enjoy. Yeah, I think you got it. I think you need to turn it off. I don't want to touch